Okay, so this is Maisam. She's going to be talking to us today about for EDI Collective, which is Equality, Diversity and Inclusion. We've got a few questions. So firstly, we'd just like to tell us a bit about yourself, what you're about and your work.
Yeah, so I was born and raised in the Gaza Strip for most of my life. In 2015, I moved to the UK for my master's degree in London. And stayed for love and for life. I started my journey as a linguist, and my fascination with languages kind of resulted in a fascination in culture, and then somehow that led me to politics. My career is basically a result of a series of sarcastic scuffs and giggles from friends and family and others with whom I accidentally sometimes spoke about my ambition that transcends traditional roles. I can't speak for all households in the MENA region because we're not a homogeneous pool of people. But in my household, the ultimate role for you that you're groomed for from childhood was being a wife and a mother. Now, this doesn't mean that I was not allowed to seek higher education, that I fought for my right to seek higher education. On the contrary, I was very actively encouraged to educate myself, but still that was to become a better mother and a better wife. So it's still kind of feeding into that role. The focus of my career at the moment is basically pressuring major players such as the government and international institutions to kind of change their perspectives and formulate better policies in the Middle East, while obviously trying to working with local communities to educate them and empower them to apply the right changes. So yeah, in a nutshell, that'll be me.
So the next question is, so these questions are more about more like theoretical questions or like opinions just to spark conversation. We've got often Middle East and North African women are being portrayed through various forms in the media in the West as passive victims of their cultures and religions. Could you tell us your thought on this? I know you touched on it there when you were talking, but
Yeah, well, my first reaction is yes, it's true. And we're either depicted as passive victims or angry or exotic sexual objects. And yes, I am constantly put in situations where I'm stripped of my agency and I'm simply angry and resentful many times. But the main problem here is that when this becomes your identity and it becomes the automatic association, when someone thinks about an Arab woman or a woman of color, you immediately think of those things. You're not thinking about what situations have led them to be angry, what situations have stripped them of their agencies. It's not something that I'm genetically born to be. You have to look beyond those associations and try and study and understand what made women experience those things. And all women experience those situations, and it's not all my identity or culture is about. There's way more than this that make me feel victim and make me feel powerless. And the right way to look at it is not by saying, well, women there are this and that. But the right way to look at it and talk about it is by saying, well, why do we think of Arab women as this and that?
Famous, isn't it? So
exactly.
You've got to look at the context, and I think a phrase I heard recently is, which is really relevant, is intellectual empathy. So it's being
exactly
people and then putting it into practice and not again unpicking these assumptions and.
Yeah, I mean, those assumptions are true. A lot of those women are victims. A lot of them are angry. But why?
Yeah, and that's where you start changing things when you look at the roots. So,
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. 100%.
So next question is, at EDI we champion equality. Can you tell us of any experience of inequality in your work, in your life, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, where do I start? Well, let's talk about my current experience, because like 30 years, well, yeah, like 30 years is a long time for a woman. Like there's a lot of inequality and all of that. But let's just talk about the current experience and my experience currently with inequality. Well, before it was defined by being a woman of color, by being a woman and like my gender and my color, but now it's like the added layer of being a first generation immigrant. So on top of what I would experience as a woman of color, I will have to experience it all as an immigrant as well. I can confidently say that London is a very, very culturally diverse place, and I'm happy as an individual to live in a place like London at a time like this. But honestly, structurally and institutionally, London and the entirety of the UK are not built for immigrants. So all these questions that we're talking about, like diversity and people of color and having the opportunity and having access to education and services, yes, but also like there are questions about an immigrant who comes to the UK, like where do they go? And I'll give you like very, very specific examples that a normal person would not think about them. So let's say, so I come here, you're waiting for your visa situation or whatever, like your settlement situation to be settled. That will take 6 months, 7 months, 8 months, sometimes a year, 2 years. While you're doing that, and you're doing it all legally, all through the right channels, and everything is correct, by the book, and you get your like temporary visa from the government, and you have the right to work, and then you apply for jobs, and all the jobs are like, but this is temporary. Like I won't want to invest my resources into someone who can be rejected and can be, deported in a few months. So you end up going for jobs because you desperately need money. You're living in London or wherever you're living, you need money. So you go for jobs like cash in hand, like there's no protection, there's very long hours, very demeaning, something that has nothing to do with all the work that you've done. Like I came to the UK with 4 degrees. I worked at the Congress, I worked with the American consulate, and then I ended up serving coffee for 16 hours a day, and I'm not even paid the living wage. So it's very difficult, like those little things. Renting, you go to rent, well, but I don't have a bank card yet. I don't have a job. I don't have a reference from my job. I can't give you like a grantor, which they ask you for. I don't know anyone. Like I just came to the country. You can't rent. Dating. You go date and you're like, oh boy, the first date, and the questions that you get, you're seen as like this exotic alien, and they ask you those questions, and no matter like how educated or cultured they are, and I'm not saying that you can't be culturally curious about the other person, but it's different asking a woman or your whoever you're dating, what are your Christmas traditions? Then, well, do you go to school on donkeys? And they're like, no, we don't. Like, educate yourself. Exactly.
Something we were talking about earlier, and then they're trying. You need to unpick them, and if you're getting that thrown at you, and you're just a bit like, what? Don't know.
What bubble are you living in? Because this information is not very difficult to get. You won't come across them. You need to actively look for them, but they're not very difficult to see that people from Palestine don't really go to schools on donkeys. Yeah. Even positive racism, where like even compliments become insults. I'm sure that people are genuinely interested of how I'm so different from the stereotypes that they've been fed their entire lives. Like, how come you're so educated? How come you speak English so well? But like, I'm sure your intentions are pure, but it's not really hard to see that those are stereotypes that you've been fed, and you need to go and look for things. But no one has the time, or no one wants to make the effort to do it, unfortunately.
I think what we've gathered from what you just said there is that on paper, it seems like the UK are a very empathetic country and they want to bring people in, and do you know what I mean? And then it doesn't work in practice, like what you're saying. So it looks like, yeah, come, there's jobs available, come live here. And then when it's put into practice, when you're the person experiencing it, all the little problems that are going on just aren't, they don't
Exactly.
made, like it doesn't fit. Which is
No, they don't think of the little, because the processes that they have are processes for the people who live here.
yeah.
So they would assume that you will have a bank account. They
Yeah.
would assume that you know someone who earns more than 35K. Of course, everyone, and now I know a lot of people who earn more than 35K. But when I came to the UK, I barely knew myself. So like, don't ask me for those things. Like, try and carve other processes for other people if you want them to find legal channels into getting into the UK market.
We've got the next question. This is a very broad question. So just sort of shape it how you'd like to shape it. Who has the power over Middle East and North African women's rights?
Well, that's a big question, but my first reaction would be women themselves. They are the ones who have all the power to do it. And I'm not saying that women are, like, in the Middle East are sitting around and they have the power and they're not using it. Of course they are, but still there are many ways that women can change the way, like, they live. And I'll give you very specific examples. So when my brother kind of is raised in a way that, like, you don't have to make your own bed because your sisters would make it for you. And those are things that are very common in Arabic households. Or you don't have to make your own, like, food because your sisters or your mom would make it for you. It's usually the mother who feeds them those kind of things. Recently, we looked at a study from Egypt where the like harassment of women is extremely high. So 98, as much as 98% of women in Egypt experience sexual harassment in the street in many forms. And then you find things where they ask women and men the same question. And then so one of the questions was, well, do you think the man has the right to harass a woman if she's dressed provocatively? And I was so surprised to find more women said yes than men. So yes, there's so much that women can do to change these. They need to educate themselves, and they can do it. Men are, like, I know we might talk about this in a bit, but also men have also agency to change how women are perceived. So yeah, the one who has the right to the right and the power to do it are women themselves first, and then partner with men to do whatever you need done very soon, hopefully.
I think that relates to a question that I accidentally missed off earlier, when said that when I studied religion and theology at Uni of Manchester, and I've gravitated towards like Middle Eastern studies, and in my studies, what I've gathered when I study feminisms in other than the West is that equality, the term equality, is a really controversial term to associate with women's rights. So what I read, I can't remember who it was by, but I read this book before called Gender and Agency, and it was basically talking about how the equality is that's like what we talked about earlier, that doesn't fit the scheme of these people's feminisms. Do you know what I mean? Whereas maybe agency would more, and I'd just like to see your view on that.
Yeah, well, I like this can be divided into two ways. Well, the first one is that, yes, the first models of feminism and the way women looked at questions of equality and justice and freedom are very different from what I would perceive as freedom and as equality and as justice. Because my experience is very, very different from a woman in London, like 20 or 50 or even now. So whatever you whatever meaning that I can get from those theories is that cannot be applied to my experience. So whatever you say is equality is not what I perceive as equality. Whatever you say is freedom for women, like in many Western societies, is like owning your own body, like wearing whatever you want, and that's all nice, but in practice it means that, and like if you see a woman with a hijab, it will be like, oh look, she's stripped of her freedom, but she might not be. Like I know that a lot of women are forced to wear hijab, but a lot of women are not.
Yeah.
And when you see, like, for me, freedom is the freedom of me having the choice to wear hijab. So yeah, but and then the other part of this is, generally equality is not exactly what I would be looking for, because women and men are different. Women here and men there and women there are also different. So when someone, like I kind of had this experience with my first boyfriend who was like very big on feminism and equality, and like, but he took it so literally that, for example, when I have my like a heavy bag and he, like, his bag is a bit lighter, he'd be like, he wouldn't help me because he's like, you're a strong woman, like it would be insulting to you that I would take your bag and carry it for you. I'm like, no, that's not it. It's just like, I'm much smaller and I can't really carry it. So you'd carry it not as a man, but as someone who's with me and can carry it. So it's like, you don't really look for equality in all situations, and you just look for fairness and justice, and you tailor the meaning to your experience, and you need to have enough openness of mindness to understand that the meaning could be different from one place to another, not try to force whatever you perceive as that on other women or other people.
That's a really good, like, general analogy, that scenario. Do you know what I mean? That brings in the conversations that we've had, like, about equality and justice and men and women. I really like that.
Exactly.
So this is the last question. Given the varied experience lived within the Middle East and North Africa, do you think that MENA is an appropriate label, or moreover, that the study would benefit from narrowing the demographic?
To be honest, like, as a first step, yes, it is. But stopping there is what creates all those stereotypes and general misconceptions. We won't be too far off studying the region as a unit, because, like, you can still find general truths about women's experiences across it. The simple fact that we share language, that we share like the same colonial history, the same political and judicial systems, makes it almost correct to consider the region as a unit. But general truths are not going to help you really understand what women experience. The nuances are very, very important, and they guarantee avoiding stereotyping and misportraying. And it will help you understand that when you meet a Palestinian woman, the conversation would go very differently from meeting a Saudi woman, for example. So yeah, generally, we have certain expectations. We have certain, like, a woman should do this and a woman should do that. A woman should dress this way and a woman should dress that way. Those are general truths, yes. But it doesn't mean that I will have the same choices and freedoms as a woman from Qatar or a woman from the UAE. We're very different. Like, I'm half Egyptian and I'm very, very close to Egypt. And women there are very different than me. And the sexual harassment that they experience are different from what I would experience. And put on that, like, I have to deal with the occupation and how like the humanitarian crisis kind of have an effect on households, and how women are kind of stripped from agency, and like how men are stripped from agency, and like how this plays out. It's very, very different from somewhere like Tunis, to Tunisia, that where like there was a revolution, and then it manifested itself in many other ways. So yeah, as a starting point, we can look at the region and we can find truths from looking at the region as a unit, but don't be lazy. Don't stop there. There's so many more fascinating and interesting differences between women here and there.
And we've got last question is, do you think that the study of MENA women would benefit from a study of MENA men generally?
Okay, so to be honest, that when you study women's rights and women's experiences, what you really study is the structure. What you really study is the institution. And when you do that, you like automatically have to study men and women. Whenever I say to someone that I did a master's in gender studies, it's not, we didn't take women and just studied women. We studied the entire interaction, the dynamic, the very structure, the very basis of what made women feel this way, and what helped men nurture those like misogynies and like, you know, how it became so structured and how it became so powerful. It takes women and men to break or make a society. So yeah, by association, automatically you have to look at men, and in gender studies, men can be as victimized as women, and they can be harmed by the patriarchy as much as women, because you are expecting things from women and you're expecting things from men as well. And a lot of men don't really want to fit in those. I'm not saying that men are equally as victims as women in many ways, but all I'm saying is that they're definitely a part of it. And I can't imagine any conversation about women's rights without including men in it.
That was, thank you for that. Really appreciate that.
Thank you for having me. And
watching you
with what you're doing.
I've been watching you to translate what you're saying. Like, that's been really, really helpful.
Thank you very much.